The English Channel ferry crossing is one of the most routine and workaday maritime journeys in the world. For decades, these vessels have served as glorified bus rides across the sea. Utilitarian workhorses shuttling millions of passengers, cars and freight trucks between the UK and mainland Europe with monotonous regularity. The ships themselves, known as roll-on roll-off or ro-ro ferries, are designed for speed and efficiency, not for glamour. On the evening of March 6, 1987, one such ferry, the MS Herald of Free Enterprise, was preparing for its scheduled departure, bound for Dover, England. The weather was calm, the journey was short, and for the 459 passengers and 80 crew on board, there was no reason to believe this trip would be anything other than utterly unremarkable. Yet in less than 2 minutes, a single, forgotten task, born from a culture of carelessness, would transform this routine vessel into a scene of devastating chaos, creating a disaster so swift and so preventable, it remains a terrifying case study in systemic failure. The key to understanding the disaster lies in the ship's design and its specific operational context that day. The Herald of Free Enterprise was a ro-ro ferry, which meant vehicles could drive directly onto a cavernous open car deck via huge doors at the bow and stern. This design was incredibly efficient for loading and unloading, but it carried a lethal vulnerability. The car deck was a massive, unsubdivided space running the length of the ship. If water were to enter this deck, there were no internal walls or bulkheads to stop it from sloshing around freely, a dangerous phenomenon known as the free surface effect. A significant amount of water on the car deck could destabilize and capsize a ship with terrifying speed. The only things protecting the vessel from this fate were the watertight bow and stern doors. They had to be closed and secured before the ship set sail. On that fateful evening, the port operations were rushed. The tide at Zeebrugge was such that the ferry could not use its usual double-decker loading ramp, forcing all vehicles onto the main G-deck. To achieve the correct trim for the journey, the crew had to deliberately pump water into the forward ballast tanks, effectively lowering the bow of the ship in the water. This meant the open bow doors were now only a few feet above the waterline, a critical fact that would soon prove fatal. The task of closing the 300-ton inner and outer bow doors fell to the assistant boatswain, Mark Stanley. After ensuring the vehicle ramp was clear, he was expected to close the doors and then report to his station on the bridge for lookout duties. However, a memo had recently instructed him to also clean the car deck upon arrival, a task which often left him exhausted. As the ship prepared to depart, Stanley, tired from a long day's work, briefly returned to his cabin and fell asleep. He did not close the doors. This single act of human error was the first link in a deadly chain of failures. The boatswain, Terence Ayling, was supposed to stay and witness the doors closing, but he had left the deck, assuming his assistant would handle it. The first officer, Leslie Sabell, whose duty it was to ensure the doors were secure, later stated that he saw Stanley walking towards the doors from the bridge and made the fatal assumption that the task was complete. Crucially, the ship's captain, David Lurie, had no way of knowing the doors were still wide open. The Herald of Free Enterprise, a modern ferry, was not equipped with any form of indicator light on the bridge to confirm the status of the bow doors. Requests for such a simple, inexpensive safety device to be installed had been repeatedly made by other captains and officers in the fleet. In a now infamous memo that would become a centerpiece of the inquiry, the management of the ferry company, Townsend Thorson, had dismissed these requests with contempt, branding them as unnecessary and stating, "Do not assume that the shore-based staff is wealthy enough to continue to invest in equipment." This was the voice of the company's culture: schedules and costs over safety. At 7:28 p.m, with its bow doors still gaping open like a huge mouth, the Herald of Free Enterprise left its berth and headed out of the protected inner harbour. As it cleared the harbour wall and entered the open sea, the ship accelerated to its cruising speed of 18 knots. This created a bow wave, a surge of water pushed forward by the vessel's movement. Instantly, seawater began to pour onto the cavernous car deck. Hundreds of tons of cold, heavy North Sea water flooded the vehicle deck in a matter of seconds. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The immense weight of the water caused the ship to list sharply to its port side. On the car deck, lorries and cars, which were also poorly secured, broke free from their chains and slid across the deck, smashing into the portside and exacerbating the list with an avalanche of steel. Inside the passenger lounges, restaurants and bars, the world was turned upside down with shocking violence. A quiet, mundane scene of people reading, drinking tea and talking was transformed into a nightmare. People, tables, chairs and heavy slot machines were flung across the rooms with lethal force. The lights went out, plunging the ship into a terrifying darkness filled with the cacophony of smashing glass, twisting metal and human screams. From the moment water first entered the car deck to the ship being on its side at a 90-degree angle, a mere 90 seconds had passed. The ship's rapid capsizing was both its tragedy and its salvation. It came to rest on a shallow sandbar less than a kilometre from the shore, with half of its structure submerged and the other half exposed to the cold night air. This prevented it from sinking completely into the deep channel, which would have meant almost no survivors. But for those inside, it was a vertical, darkened maze. Survivors clung to whatever they could in the near-total blackness, drenched in freezing water mixed with oil and diesel from the broken vehicles below. The portside windows were now the floor, and the starboard windows were now the ceiling, 50 feet above. The rescue effort that followed was one of immense bravery. A passenger, Andrew Parker, became a public hero after forming a human bridge with his body to allow others to cross a dangerous gap. Crew members smashed windows to create escape routes. Royal Navy and Belgian divers, along with local emergency services, arrived to a scene of total chaos, working through the night in perilous conditions to rescue those trapped inside the submerged sections of the wreck. The human cost was devastating. 193 people, passengers and crew, lost their lives. They died from drowning, from injuries sustained in the capsize, and from hypothermia in the frigid March water. The subsequent public inquiry, led by Justice Barry Sheen, delivered one of the most damning indictments of corporate culture in modern history. While the immediate blame fell on Stanley, Sable, and Lurie for their dereliction of duty, Justice Sheen looked deeper at the company itself. His report uncovered a disease of sloppiness and an attitude of complacency that permeated Townsend Thorson from top to bottom. He excoriated a management team that did not have a proper comprehension of what their duties were. The failure to install a simple warning light, a device that would have cost a few £100s, was held up as a symbol of a company that prioritised profits and schedules over fundamental safety. For the first time, a major company faced a corporate manslaughter charge, though it ultimately did not result in a conviction due to legal technicalities of the time. The inquiry concluded that the Herald of Free Enterprise disaster was an inevitability caused by years of negligence. It was a catastrophe born from a complete and systemic breakdown of procedure, communication, and responsibility. The tragedy served as a brutal wake-up call, leading to sweeping changes in maritime safety regulations, including the mandatory implementation of the International Safety Management Code. Yet its legacy remains a testament to how a culture of corporate indifference and a series of small failures can compound with breathtaking speed into a disaster with immense consequences.